Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson tonight. A remarkable day. Brett Kavanaugh just stepped away from the microphone in the Senate hearing room. He spent 3.5 hours there. It was a remarkable moment, stunning in many ways, likely without precedent in the lifetimes of many who watched it. Until this afternoon, Kavanaugh had struck many who watched him as bookish and academic, the classic temperament of a federal judge. He emerged, though, this afternoon transformed, a man on fire, fighting with everything he had to save his family, himself, and the presumption of innocence. Kavanaugh began his testimony today with an unequivocal denial of the allegations against him. I did not sexually assault Christine Blasey Ford or anyone else at any time, he said, his voice rising. The charges are false. But then Kavanaugh did something entirely unexpected. He broadened his response, and he aimed it directly at the Senate Democrats sitting before him.
This confirmation process has become a national disgrace. The Constitution gives the Senate an important role in the confirmation process, but you have replaced advice and consent with search and destroy. Since my nomination in July, there's been a frenzy on the left to come up with something, anything, to block my confirmation. Shortly after I was nominated, the Democratic Senate leader said he would, quote, oppose me with everything he's got. A Democratic senator on this committee publicly referred to me as evil. Evil. Think about that word. And said that those who supported me were, quote, complicit in evil. Another Democratic senator on this committee said, quote, Judge Kavanaugh is your worst nightmare. A former head of the Democratic National Committee said, quote, Judge Kavanaugh will threaten the lives of millions of Americans for decades to come. I understand the passions of the moment, but I would say to those senators, your words have meaning. Millions of Americans listened carefully to you. Given comments like those, is it any surprise that people have been willing to do anything, to make any physical threat against my family, to send any violent email to my wife, to make any kind of allegation against me and against my friends, to blow me up and take me down? You sowed the wind. For decades to come, I fear that the whole country will reap the whirlwind.
No Supreme Court nominee has spoken like this in memory, not even Clarence Thomas. But then none has been accused more recklessly or with less evidence than Brett Kavanaugh has. And he did nothing to hide his rage.
This whole 2-week effort has been a calculated and orchestrated political hit, fueled with apparent pent-up anger about President Trump and the 2016 election, fear that has been unfairly stoked about my judicial record, revenge on behalf of the Clintons, and millions of dollars in money from outside left-wing opposition groups. This is a circus. The consequences will extend long past my nomination. The consequences will be with us for decades. This grotesque and coordinated character assassination will dissuade competent and good people of all political persuasions from serving our country. And as we all know, in the United States political system of the early 2000s, what goes around comes around. I am an optimistic guy. I always try to be on the sunrise side of the mountain, to be optimistic about the day that is coming. But today, I have to say that I fear for the future.
Though throughout the hearing he categorically denied her claims about him, Kavanaugh showed no animus personally toward Christine Ford. Instead, in one of the most riveting moments of the day, he explained how his family had prayed for her.
I'm not questioning that Dr. Ford may have been sexually assaulted by some person in some place at some time. But I have never done this to her or to anyone. That's not who I am. It is not who I was. I am innocent of this charge. I intend no ill will to Dr. Ford and her family. The other night, Ashley and my daughter Liza said their prayers, and little Liza, all of 10 years old, said to Ashley, we should pray for the woman. It's a lot of wisdom from a 10-year-old. We mean no ill will.
Behind him as he spoke, Brett Kavanaugh's mother wept with emotion. Kavanaugh concluded his remarks today, as he'd begun them, defiantly.
I will not be intimidated into withdrawing from this process. You've tried hard. You've given it your all. No one can question your effort. But your coordinated and well-funded effort to destroy my good name and destroy my family will not drive me out. The vile threats of violence against my family will not drive me out. You may defeat me in the final vote, but you'll never get me to quit. Never. Democrats in the room seem stunned by Kavanaugh's remarks, and for a moment they seem thrown back on their heels, but not for long. Ranking member Dianne Feinstein began the questioning for Democrats. She seemed to suggest that Kavanaugh was secretly a sexual predator. Reading from a script, Feinstein referred to a woman called Julie Swetnick, who was a college student in suburban Washington when Brett Kavanaugh was in high school. Yesterday, as we told you, Swetnick claimed that she witnessed at least 10 public gang rapes in which Brett Kavanaugh was supposedly present and participating. It was a remarkable charge, and yet Feinstein never mentioned that part of Swetnick's claim. Why is that? Well, because the story is ridiculous. It clashes with common sense. It is lunatic. Nobody believes it. So Feinstein left that part out in order to smear Kavanaugh in front of the world and omitted highly relevant information about his accuser, indeed the entire accusation. It was reprehensibly dishonest behavior, especially for a U.S. senator, and Kavanaugh all but said so.
I'm talking about getting the evidence and having the evidence looked at, and I don't understand. You know, we hear from the witnesses, but the FBI isn't interviewing them and isn't giving us any facts. So all we have.
You're interviewing me. You're interviewing me. You're doing it, Senator. I'm sorry to interrupt, but you're doing it. That's there's no conclusions reached.
And what you're saying, if I understand it, is that the allegations by Dr. Ford, Ms. Ramirez, and Ms. Swetnick are wrong.
Yeah, that is emphatically what I'm saying. Emphatically. The Swetnick thing is a joke. That is a farce.
Would you like to say more about it?
No.
It was a surreal moment. The day was filled with those. At times, the hypocrisy level got so high you wondered how people in the room could breathe. There was the oleaginous senator from New Jersey, a man who once admitted molesting a girl in high school, sitting there accusing someone else of molesting a girl in high school.
There are dark elements that allow unconscionable levels of, unacceptable levels of sexual assault and harassment. You are opening up to open air hurt and pain that goes on across this country. As you are speaking truth that this country needs to understand.
It'd be interesting to hear that the girl Cory Booker says he molested speak her truth in an open hearing. We eagerly await that testimony, hopefully soon. Then there was the bloodless senator from Connecticut, the guy who repeatedly lied about serving in Vietnam, trying his best to impugn another man's integrity.
False in one thing, false in everything, meaning in jury instructions that some of us as prosecutors have heard many times, is told a jury that they can disbelieve a witness if they find him to be false in one thing. So the core of why we're here today really is credibility.
The core of why we're here is an allegation for which the 4 witnesses present have all said it didn't happen.
False in one thing, false in many things. If you're Senator Blumenthal, can you even imagine saying something like that? What kind of lack of self-awareness would it take to say something like that? Remarkable. Underneath all of this, though, hung the most obvious question of the day, which nobody asked out loud. Who did this to Christine Ford? Democrats claim they held these hearings for her because they care deeply about her well-being. Yet it was Democrats who leaked her name to the press against her wishes and dragged her into this maelstrom. Who did that? Well, likely someone in Dianne Feinstein's office. Feinstein claims she was not involved. She'd like the presumption of innocence on that. Okay, so who was it? If you care about Christine Ford, about all victims of sexual assaults, you'd be very anxious to know. Maybe we could have a new investigation into that. Republicans could start one immediately, like tomorrow. Would Democrats participate in an investigation to find out who leaked Christine Ford's name to the press? Probably not. They seem strikingly uninterested in talking about Christine Ford today. They rarely asked about her when Judge Kavanaugh was on the set. Instead, they peppered Kavanaugh with questions about his Georgetown prep yearbook and how much beer he drank in high school and college. Here's one of his responses to that line of questioning.
I never sexually assaulted anyone. There is a bright line between drinking beer, which I gladly do and which I fully embrace, and sexually assaulting someone, which is a violent crime. If every American who drinks beer or every American who drank beer in high school is suddenly presumed guilty of sexual assault, we'll be in an ugly new place in this country. I never committed sexual assault.
When they weren't demanding answers about his high school yearbook, Democrats stalled for time. They did that by demanding yet another FBI investigation into Kavanaugh.
Why aren't you also asking the FBI to investigate these claims?
Judge Kavanaugh, will you support an FBI investigation right now?
You could actually just get this open so that we can talk to these witnesses and the FBI can do it instead of us.
Are you willing to ask the White House to authorize the FBI to investigate the claims that have been made against you?
An FBI investigation sounds reasonable. It would be the 7th FBI investigation that has looked deeply into Brett Kavanaugh's personal conduct. He was once staff secretary of the President of the United States and had the highest level of security clearance this country gives, one that gave him access to America's nuclear codes. He got that clearance because the FBI spoke at length to a cross-section of everyone he'd ever met, going back to high school and earlier, and there were no hints of sexual assaults, none. There's nothing left to investigate here. Everyone knows that. This is a political tactic, and it's disingenuous. Why are they doing it? Well, simple. Democrats know that if the vote on Brett Kavanaugh is held soon, he will be confirmed. If it is delayed by pointless FBI investigations being demanded by demagogues in bad faith, he will not be confirmed because the accusations will never end. The incentive to make them is too strong. You'll see more anonymous claims that he led gang rapes on sailboats in Rhode Island or whatever. And this grotesque circus will continue. Our ancient standards of justice will further degrade with the help of the Senate Democratic Conference. But Democrats will retain power, and that is the point. It's the only point of all of this. But for now, and until and if that happens, no Republican senator who watched Brett Kavanaugh testify today is likely to vote against him. Those who did would be quickly punished by voters. Many viewers at home wept as they watched Kavanaugh speak today. Maybe you did as you saw it. Those of us who have been falsely accused of sexual assault by strangers understood well the feeling of terror and loneliness that shone on Kavanaugh's face. Prove you didn't do it, or everything you have will be taken from you by force. That's not an easy task for anyone. Kavanaugh came as close as a man can to clearing his own name. He didn't get a lot of help from Senate Republicans other than Lindsey Graham. The next time you're falsely accused of a crime, don't ask them for backup. Brett Kavanaugh did it all himself. He had no choice. As his life collapsed around him, he stood bravely and he spoke clearly, and it's hard to imagine a fiercer test of a man's character than that. We're going to be considering all for the next hour what happened in the Senate today and its implications, but we're going to begin, fittingly, with Fox senior political analyst Brit Hume, who spent all day covering this story. You were on the set from 9:45 this morning until now. What was that experience like as someone who's watched a lot of Senate hearings?
Well, it was personally distressing to me that we even got to this point where this squalid allegations came up, after the matter was essentially closed. And he had to respond to it in such a way that he had to try to prove a negative, which is virtually impossible to do. And then, as I rather anticipated, came her testimony, which was emotional, as was his, and powerful in its way. And I thought to myself, now the burden is even higher on him. And the Republicans did next to nothing in the hired questioner they had, through the hired questioner they had to cast doubt on her testimony. And politically speaking, that might have been wise. So it all was up to him. And I was wondering whether he could do it, and whether the mild-mannered young man, young compared to me, that he is, would be effective in this setting under these circumstances. I have to say, I think he was extremely effective. I think his emotion, at times he was near tears, made his testimony credible. If you're accused, Tucker, and you may know this, of something that wrong and it's false, it makes you emotional.
I do know that feeling very well.
Exactly, and I think that came through. So the audience here really comes down to a handful of Republican senators who are undecided, at least nominally undecided. It is a little hard to imagine after today's testimony by him that they would turn against him. Remember, these allegations against him were uncorroborated when the day began, and they were uncorroborated at the end of the day still. And the only corroborative evidence really that was produced were his old calendars and diaries that he produced. They're not dispositive, but there's something. And so it becomes down to his word against his, and he seems to me, at least as credible as she was. So I think, at this point, it's utterly regrettable that we got here. The process has been damaged for years. Now it's ruined, and this is where we are. One hopes he may survive it.
The moment that shocked me the most, that I expected least, and I agree with you, I never thought a man like Brett Kavanaugh could do what he did today. I was stunned by it. But the moment that really shocked me was when he spoke about praying with his daughters for Christine Ford. As a father, what was your reaction to that?
This is what serious Christians do. This is what serious Christians are called to do. That you are to love your enemies, and that you are to pray for those who may have harmed you. Now, I'm not saying Christine Blasey Ford was actually an enemy in that sense, but in this setting, of course she was. She was the one pitted against him.
She has harmed him.
Yes. She's harmed him, certainly. And, that this is the kind of people. I don't know Brett Kavanaugh, but I know his father, so I know the family to some extent. I also know her father, and that family to some extent. They're fine people, all of them. So that's one of the things that makes this thing so terribly sad. But yes. I think that was a moment. And then I think when Senator Lindsey Graham, who I think has been indignant about this for weeks now, got his turn, he wasn't having any questioning done by somebody else. He made as powerful a statement and denunciation of this process and what's happened to it as any I've ever heard from anybody in this town. I've been around here a long time.
That was an unbelievable moment. We're going to play clips from that in just a minute in case you missed it. That was a moment, for sure. I will never forget that. Britt Hume, thank you very much.
You bet, Tucker.
During her testimony earlier today, Christine Ford said she had no doubt she was the victim of Judge Kavanaugh 36 years ago.
Dr. Ford, with what degree of certainty do you believe Brett Kavanaugh assaulted you?
100%.
Senator Lindsey Graham, who has been a judge and a defense attorney, said much more was needed. Shortly after Kavanaugh's opening statement, he denounced the entire process as a sham and a disgrace with a level of vehemence we almost never see in the U.S. Senate. Watch this.
If you wanted an FBI investigation, you could have come to us. What you want to do is destroy this guy's life, hold this seat open, and hope you win in 2020. You've said that, not me. You've got nothing to apologize for. When you see Sotomayor and Kagan, tell them that Lindsey said hello, because I voted for them. I would never do to them what you've done to this guy. I cannot imagine what you and your family have gone through. Boy, y'all want power. God, I hope you never get it. I hope the American people can see through this sham, that you knew about it and you held it. You had no intention of protecting Dr. Ford. None. She's as much of a victim as you are. God, I hate to say it because these have been my friends. But let me tell you, when it comes to this, you're looking for a fair process. You came to the wrong town at the wrong time, my friend. You have interacted with professional women all your life, not one accusation. You're supposed to be Bill Cosby when you're a junior and senior in high school. And all of a sudden you got over it. It's been my understanding that if you drug women and rape them for 2 years in high school, you probably don't stop. Here's my understanding. If you lived a good life, people would recognize it. To my Republican colleagues, if you vote no, you're legitimizing the most despicable thing I have seen in my time in politics. You want this seat? I hope you never get it. I hope you're on the Supreme Court. That's exactly where you should be. And I hope that the American people will see through this charade. And I wish you well, and I intend to vote for you, and I hope everybody who's fair-minded will.
When was the last time you saw something like that in a Senate hearing? Molly Hemingway is a senior editor with The Federalist, and she joins us tonight. Watching Lindsey Graham give that speech, and we truncated it. I mean, it's worth pulling up and watching the whole thing. Not reading from notes. I mean, most of these people are reading directly, from a script written by staff. He meant that.
Yeah, and I think he really spoke to a lot of people who feel like the sane part of the country has been taken hostage by the insane part of the country. What we have witnessed in these last couple of weeks is just a travesty. Anyone who cares about rule of law, presumption of innocence, having meaningful legal and political institutions is wondering just what's going on. The media are throwing their credibility away. They're diminishing all of their standards. And Democratic partisans also behaved shamelessly, depending on how you look at it. And it is something that I think a lot of people don't understand what was unleashed by this behavior by Democrats and the media. There is extreme sadness at what we saw happen to this man.
Yes.
There's just so much anger, too.
I agree.
And a desire to make sure that we do not let this happen, regardless of if you're liberal or conservative, Democrat or Republican. We have standards for how we do things in this country. We have standards for what we demand before we declare someone guilty.
If the Republican Party was doing this right now to a Democrat, I would attack them as vehemently. This is totally immoral, and it is nothing. I don't know Kavanaugh. I don't know anything about him. I don't care. This is wrong.
I think it's so beyond a Supreme Court nomination. It's even beyond this man's honor and his name and his integrity, which he clearly cares a lot about. To me, this is about the Republic and whether we will do things this way, whether we will let our political and legal institutions crumble, or whether we have a higher standard that we're known for, that's built into our Constitution in the Sixth Amendment, where we have rights for people who are accused, and where we don't destroy people's lives because we disagree with them politically.
I had, honestly, at least 10 people text me today to say, men too, that they were weeping as they watched his testimony.
I was sobbing when I was watching it. I heard that a lot from people as well. It was hard just to watch these clips here. I commend that 10-year-old daughter for praying, and I think a lot of people who are Christian or people who pray should think about doing that, because this is one such time. It is hard to watch what this family has gone through, and it's a reminder, there are standards for when you accuse someone, that there must be evidence to support that.
Yes.
We did not have any additional supporting evidence today, any at all. It's not an issue of whether you find one person compelling or another person compelling. It's an issue of whether we have evidence to convict someone in this court of public opinion or otherwise, to destroy their life. And we did not get that today.
That's exactly right.
This is actually a fairly simple issue at this point.
It told us everything. Lindsey Graham summed it up perfectly. He said, this is about power, you want power, and I hope you never get it. And that's how I feel about it. Molly Hemingway, you've been great on this. Thank you very much.